There are a lot of swimmers that have pretty good freestyles until they have to breathe. And unfortunately, unless they're an expert at the 50, swimmers are going to have to breathe. So when swimmers struggle with their breathing and it's killing their speed, the only way they can take the next step is learn how to breathe more effectively. Let's dive into how to make that happen. Breathing is an absolutely critical skill in freestyle. More than just about any stroke, poor breathing can really disrupt the rhythm, the timing, the alignment, and the propulsion that's created during freestyle. And if swimmers have a poor breath, it can wreck an otherwise effective stroke. And because swimmers need to breathe in every event other than the 50, they have to figure out how to breathe effectively if they want to swim fast. So why does breathing matter? Well, it affects the three primary skills that lead to fast swimming. It negatively affects alignment, it negatively affects propulsion, and it negatively affects timing. So from an alignment perspective, if you move the head, the body's going to react. So if the head lifts up, the hips are going to drop. If the head moves to the side, the hips are going to go the other way. And so all of a sudden, if that head's moving around when swimmers are breathing, they're either going to be swimming at an angle or they're going to be bouncing up and down from a horizontal perspective. And from a lateral perspective, they're going to be going side to side. And the more swimmers deviate from moving straight forward, the more resistance they create. The more resistance they create, the slower they go. But it's not just an alignment problem. It's also a propulsion problem. If the head pulls out of line, well, guess what? The shoulders are going to be out of line. And if the shoulders are out of position, it's going to be a lot harder for swimmers to pull effectively. Everything needs to be lined up so that swimmers can drop the arm in right where it needs to be and pull back. So it's really difficult to execute effective pulling mechanics if the shoulders aren't in the right position to allow swimmers to put their arms in the right position and then create force with the strongest muscles of the body. So if the breathing's pulling the body offline, the pull is going to be affected just as much as alignment's going to be effective. Lastly, it becomes a timing issue as well. And so fast swimming is all about precision and the right thing happening at the right time. If the head's moving more than it needs to during the breath, it's going to take more time. If swimmers are just slow with the breath, it's going to take more time. And so one of two things are going to happen. Swimmers are going to either lose effective stroke timing, which is definitely not going to help them swim fast, or they'll be able to maintain effective stroke timing, but only by slowing everything down. And if it takes longer to perform the same skills, that means their stroke rate's going to be lower, and it's going to be unnecessarily lower, which means they're going to swim slower than they otherwise could. So for these reasons, breathing is really important. If breathing's not good, swimmers are going to slow down because they negatively impact their alignment. Up goes resistance. Swimmers are going to slow down because they don't create enough propulsion. Down goes speed, and the timing's either going to be off, which is going to make it harder to create propulsion and maintain alignment, or timing might be maintained, but the longer that breath takes, the longer the stroke cycle takes, which is also going to slow swimmers down. So what is effective breathing? While it may be difficult for swimmers to do, effective breathing is ultimately simple, at least from a conceptual standpoint. The breath needs to be low, the breath needs to be straight, and the breath needs to be fast. With a low breath, the head should lift as little as possible. And the more the head lifts, the more the hips are going to go down. That means more resistance. That means less speed. The breath also needs to be straight, in that the head shouldn't pull to the side. It should rotate in order to get the mouth clear so that swimmers can breathe. And the more the head pulls to the side, the bigger the disruption of alignment, the more side-to-side swimming that you'll see. And when the breath is high and when the breath is not straight, the more that happens, the more that the arms are going to have to compensate because the head's offline. Swimmers are going to be less stable and they're going to have to use their arms to kind of brace, compensate to make sure that they don't lose their balance. If their arms are compensating, they're not creating propulsion, and that's no good. Lastly, the breath also needs to be fast. And so no matter what, no matter how great that breath is, it's going to disrupt the stroke a little bit. And that's why swimmers tend to not breathe in a 50. And so swimmers have to keep the breath as fast as possible because the longer it takes, the bigger the impact there's going to be. And so even if swimmers are breathing really, really well, it needs to be fast to minimize the impact. And if swimmers are breathing really poorly, it probably needs to be even faster because they need to minimize the amount of time that they're executing poor skills. So now let's take a look at it in action. And this is probably one of the best breaths I've seen. There's no disruption of the rhythm of the stroke. There's no lifting of the head. There's no pulling it to the side. And man, that breath is fast. And so this is a really good example of a breath executed really well because there's very little disruption to the stroke. There's no up and down motion, there's no side to side motion, and that breath is fast. And so the rhythm and timing of the stroke is not being disrupted. And so the faster swimmers can breathe, the more effective they're going to be at maintaining their skills even when they do breathe. So we'll take a look at it with a different swimmer from a different angle. And what you can see is that head is not lifting up. There's no side-to-side motion. So if there was a steel rod coming right through her spine, that head stays right on that steel rod. It just turns. It doesn't lift. It doesn't pull to the side. It's right exactly where it needs to be. And there's no disruption of alignment. The pulls are not being affected at all. And her breath is fast. So another really good example, maybe not quite as aggressive as that previous example in terms of the speed of the breath, but the same impact in that there's very little disruption of the stroke, and that's what allows her to go fast. And that is a huge advantage in terms of going fast. So why is improving the breath difficult? What's the challenge? Well, first of all, humans want air, and they're going to do whatever they need to do to get it. They do not care about swimming fast nearly as much as they care about staying alive. And so they're going to choose movements, they're going to choose motions that ensure they get a good breath, even if that compromises their speed by a couple tenths of a second. And so they're going to breathe in ways that ensure that they get air into their mouth as opposed to water. And the easiest way to do that is to lift up, to pull the head to the side, to ensure that it's a safe breath. So to help swimmers breathe more effectively and ensure that they get air, we have to help them find strategies that allow them to feel safe with a more aggressive breath and doesn't increase the likelihood that they're going to inhale water, which is obviously going to be a big problem. The second issue is the quality of the feedback. In most cases, they've been breathing during freestyle for a very long time. The older the swimmer, the more likely that's the case. So they can't necessarily feel what they're doing. What feels right to them may not be right, but that's what feels normal. And anything different from that is going to feel wrong. It's going to feel bad. And they can't necessarily perceive that what they're doing isn't that effective. And so as a result, they don't understand necessarily what they do because they're very used to swimming a certain way, and that's what feels right, that's what feels good. And if they can't feel it, they can't understand it, they're not going to be able to create change, they're not going to be able to fix it. And lastly, improving the breath is actually about doing less. And so it's a lot harder to move less. And so from a conceptual standpoint, independent of swimming, trying to get people to do less with their movement is pretty counterintuitive, and it's a little bit harder for them to conceptualize. So we have to help swimmers understand what it's like to have a smaller, cleaner breath, and that can be pretty counterintuitive to most swimmers. So when it comes to solutions, we have to make sure that swimmers are comfortable breathing and they're not feel like they're under threat. And if they've been swimming a long time, they probably don't necessarily feel those threats anymore. However, if they learned the skill when they were young and when they were concerned about breathing, that skill may still have remnants of that fear because that's the state that they learned it in. So we have to undo that. We're going to have to help them understand there's a different way of breathing because you are comfortable in the water, because you are safe, because you don't need to worry about choking on water. And to do that, we have to help them feel more effective ways to breathe, and we have to help them become more aware of how their breath is impacting their stroke and how they're breathing so that they can better perceive, better understand new opportunities to breathe and help them find ways to breathe lower, straighter, and faster. Ground zero for improving breathing is managing air. So swimmers have to be comfortable in the water to execute effective breathing. There's two main skills here. They have to understand how to exchange air. They have to understand how to float. And so to help them learn how to exchange air, simple bobbing exercises can be really good where they're focusing on inhaling and exhaling with rhythm. You can do it in a lot of different ways. And for more advanced swimmers, it may not be necessary, but especially at the early stages of learning, it can be really important for swimmers to understand how to inhale when the head's out of the water and exhale when the head is in the water and do so in a fluid rhythm and control their breathing rather than just breathing whenever they want. Secondly, different floating exercises can be really effective. Starting with a ball float can be really useful for helping swimmers understand how the lungs support them and hold them in the water, allows them to be comfortable. And then by expanding into an X position, they can learn how to control their limbs and still manage their body position. There are a lot of different floating options that you can use, just as there's different variations of bobbing options. All of them can be really useful. You just want to challenge swimmers in different ways so that they get good at exchanging their air, and when the air is in their lungs, they can use that air to manage their position and be more comfortable, more stable, more relaxed in the water. So this is a super simple bobbing exercise. All they do is exhale under the water, inhale when the head comes above the water. And so this can be done in deeper water, can be done in shallower water. You can have swimmers hold their hands on the side of the pool to get a little bit more support. It's all about just patient, relaxed, rhythmic air exchange. Nothing fancy, but for swimmers that don't have that skill, it can make a huge difference. Here we have the ball float to X float, and so during the ball float, they're going to rest at the surface of the water, and they're going to rest at the surface comfortably, and then they just expand out into an X position, and they have to learn how to press into the water. They have to learn how to create tension with the backs of their legs to maintain a stable and effective position at the surface of the water. You can use lots of different letters. You can use lots of different positions. They're all challenge swimmers in different ways. The idea is to help them find ways to support themselves, be stable, be comfortable in the water, and then manage their position in order to stay relaxed on the surface of the water. So with paddle cap freestyle, swimmers are going to swim with a paddle on their head. And when they breathe, if they lift the head, they pull the head to the side, the paddle is going to come off. And so it's a really powerful strategy because it provides immediate feedback. As soon as swimmers make a mistake, that paddle's coming off. And as soon as swimmers do it well, that paddle's staying on. And it's relevant feedback. It gives them feedback about the skill that you're trying to improve. And it's very clear feedback. The paddle either stays on or it comes off. And so by providing them with immediate, relevant, and clear feedback, that's going to be really effective for learning because swimmers figure out really quickly what works and what doesn't. It's also extremely simple. It's extremely effective. The task does the teaching for you. So whether you have one swimmer in the pool or 30, they can all do the same thing at the same time. And that paddle is going to give them feedback as to whether they're breathing effectively or not. And it's going to give them immediate feedback as to whether they're breathing effectively or not. So you can coach just as well with 30 swimmers as compared to one swimmer. And that means you can get a lot more change in a lot less time. So here it is in action. Straightforward, simple. Low breath, straight breath, the paddle stays on. High breath, wide breath, the paddle comes off. And so again, it's really effective at helping swimmers understand effective breathing mechanics. And if they're not effective, they're lifting up, they're pulling to the side, that paddle's coming off, and they'll know it right away. And that encourages them to do something different to create a change so that that paddle stays on. Next up is stroke and roll. And so some swimmers really struggle with lifting the head. And so with this activity, we're going to have them roll to the breath, exaggerate the roll. There's zero lifting of the head, and that can really help them understand the rotational aspect of the breath. So what we'll have them do here is after a certain number of strokes, they're going to roll completely onto the back when they breathe. And that exaggerated movement is going to allow them to feel the rotation that comes with breathing. The goal here is to help swimmers feel that rotational component. And once they can feel it and understand it, the goal is then to work it into regular freestyle. So if swimmers are struggling with lifting rather than rotating, it can be a really effective tool to encourage them to swim differently. So if we see here, he's going to take a couple strokes and he's going to roll right onto his back. And so as you saw, there's no lifting of the head. Yeah, it's an exaggerated rotation, more than he would do, but it allows him to understand how to rotate to breathe as opposed to lift to breathe. And when they do it, when they're actually swimming, it's going to be a much smaller motion, but it allows them again to focus on the feeling of rotation rather than lifting, and they can start to incorporate that into their regular swimming. We talked about earlier about it's important to help them get a feel for what they need to do. This is a strategy that can help them get a feel for the rotation as opposed to just lifting the head. So as we've talked about, the sensory aspect is really important. And swimmers can't change what they can't feel. And so this is where we can use a snorkel strategically to help them do so. So you have them wear a snorkel and have them pay attention so that they can feel what it's like to swim freestyle without any disruption of the breath. Then they take the snorkel off and they try to recreate those same sensations even when they're breathing. And by alternating back and forth between wearing a snorkel and swimming without a snorkel, and so by alternating between wearing a snorkel and swimming without a snorkel, the goal is to minimize the difference between swimming with a snorkel and then swimming while breathing. And the smaller the gap, the better the breath. And so over time, the more that swimmers can make their freestyle when they're breathing feel like when they're swimming with a snorkel, the better the breathing is going to be. And so it's all about giving them a sensory goal when they're wearing the snorkel and then trying to match that sensation when they're swimming with regular breathing. Next up is a drill called Unco. And so too many swimmers pull before completing the breath. And that happens for two reasons. One, the pull is too fast, so they just let the arm drop right away. And the second issue is that the breath is too slow. So if they take too much time to get the head back, they're going to start pulling early. And so Unco is one-arm freestyle when they're breathing to the opposite side. So if they're using their left arm, they're breathing to the right. And if swimmers are slow with the breath or they rush the pull, they're not going to go anywhere because they're already going to be halfway through the pull by the time that they get their head back in line and they're in position to pull effectively. So by using this strategy, they can start to feel when they rush the pull or when they're slow with the breath, and they're going to be more aware of what they need to do in order to make things happen at the right time so that they can get an effective pull every time they breathe. And so they can do that by, one, being more patient out in front with the arm, or two, breathing faster. Now, if you ask them to do this drill fast, well, they're going to be under a lot more pressure to make both those happen, and they're more likely to improve in both skills. So this is a really effective strategy. If swimmers are rushing the pull on the non-breathing side, or if they're really slow with the breath, it can help them figure out how to be faster with the breath, more patient with the pull, and sync up the timing so when they breathe, their pull is not compromised. So if we watch here, he's going to have to breathe fast, and he's going to have to be patient with that arm. So you see there, he got the head back down before he really got into the pull. And by using just that one arm, it's going to give him a lot of feedback as to whether he's doing that effectively. And if he's breathing too slow or he's pulling too fast, he's going to lose that entire right arm. And then he's not going to go anywhere because he's not going to have that left arm to support it or bail it out. He can do something with the kick, but it's not going to feel good. It's not going to be fast, especially if you ask him to go fast. So he's got to be patient with that pull there and then fast with the breath, and that's going to get him back in line in time to pull effectively. Even if swimmers have good technical breaths, a lot of swimmers breathe too slow. And if they breathe slow, like we talked about earlier, the impact of the breath is going to be magnified. And since the breath's impact is usually negative, that is not a good thing. And so one of the reasons that the breath is slow is that swimmers are visual beings. Humans tend to move based on vision, even if it's not the most effective way, even if it's slow. And so if swimmers are taking the breath, they're waiting, they're looking, they're seeing something, they're focusing, and then putting their head back down, that's going to take a lot more time than if they don't look for anything in the first place. So the solution, have them close their eyes when they breathe. Have them open the eyes under the water because that's a whole lot safer. But when they close the eyes during the breath, they stop looking to breathe, and that allows them to breathe a whole lot faster. And so it's surprisingly effective, especially with swimmers that have slow breaths. They tend to breathe a whole lot faster. They tend to breathe lower. They tend to breathe straighter. It's one of those things that tends to work, and so it's a strategy I like to use all the time. You can have them do it while they're swimming regular freestyle, or you can have them do it when they're using any of the strategies we've talked about so far. One of the most important ideas for improving breathing is that you have to challenge it. And so one of the best ways to challenge it is lots of variation. Using all the different strategies in lots of different ways is going to be a lot more effective than using one strategy in one way. Let them feel the impact of the breath in a lot of different ways, and that's going to accelerate their learning. Also, ask them to perform all the strategies, all the drills at a variety of stroke rates, at a variety of speeds, because ultimately they have to breathe effectively when they race. And so if they never practice at higher stroke rates or higher speeds, they're probably not going to be able to execute those skills at higher stroke rates or higher speeds. And even if they swim primarily over longer distances, practicing these skills at high rates and high speeds is going to make executing those skills at slower speeds and slower rates a whole lot easier. You can also use training aids with all these strategies. It's certainly going to create a different feel, a different challenge, and in many cases, it can make it more difficult as well, further allowing for challenge, which allows for better learning. You can also execute all these different strategies with different breathing patterns. Sometimes swimmers can do it really well if they breathe every two, only to their preferred side, but they struggle when they go to the opposite side, and just doing the opposite side can be really useful for helping them improve their preferred side. It just feels a little bit different. Usually they can get some insight into what's happening on their preferred side. Having them breathe bilaterally, it's just a different rhythm. It's a different challenge. Breathing every 3 or every 5 is different than breathing exclusively to the right or exclusively to the left, regardless of the preferred side. So by challenging it in different ways with variation, performance, training aids, and breathing patterns, we're going to get more learning. We're going to get more effective learning. We're going to get more robust skills that can handle the pressure of competition. So here's a skill-based set that can help swimmers improve their breathing. So they're going to go 4 rounds through the whole thing. They're going to go a 25 stroke and roll, 25 Unco, 25 paddle cap freestyle, different ways to challenge the skills, And then a 50 freestyle solid effort. They do that small piece 3 times. And after 3 times, they go 100 strong effort. They're trying to hit the same stroke count and speed each 100. And by round, they're going to go breathe every 4 to the left, every 4 to the right, every 2 to the left, every 2 to the right. So we've got 3 different drills that we're going to do. We've got different breathing patterns by round. We've got multiple opportunities to take what they're doing during the drills and try to apply it during the swimming. And they have opportunities at the end of each round to put a little bit of speed into that and try to make it happen in a little bit more challenging situation. So a lot of different ways to challenge the breath, a lot of different ways to improve the breath, all while keeping it moving. This set has a little bit more of an endurance feel. They're going to go 425s paddle cap freestyle on short rest, and they're going to go with a different breathing pattern each section. So the first piece is odd breathe 5, evens breathe 3. The next section is breathe every 4, odds left, evens right. And then the next section is breathe every 2, odds left, evens right. And the 6-100s are going to be done the same way each round. The odds are with a snorkel. The evens are breathe 25 left, 25 right. And they're going to go the same stroke count, the same speed on each 100. So regardless of whether they have the snorkel or whether they're breathing, they're trying to make it feel and trying to make it be exactly the same. And by round, they're going to add a stroke for those hundreds, and they're going to try to go faster. So by the last round, they're going to be taking 2 more strokes as compared to the first round, but they should be able to go significantly faster, but they still want to be consistent with the stroke count and still want to be consistent with the speed regardless of the breathing pattern. So a little bit more of an endurance focus here with a big emphasis on breathing skill. This last set is more of a speed set. We're going to go 3 rounds through. They're going to go 425s, paddle cap freestyle, build to fast. The odds are breathe every 4, the evens are breathe every 2. Then they're going to go 25 unka with fins, fast. So they're really getting moving here, especially with the fins. They're going to have to be really fast, really effective with that breath. First one's breathe every 4, second one's breathe every 2. Then they're going 325s freestyle, minimize stroke count and time. They're going to breathe every 5, every 4, every 3. And then they're going to go 25 freestyle fast, breathe every 2. So we've got different drills here. We got different types of speed here. We're going build, we're going fast with fins, so some overspeed. We're going minimize stroke count and time, and we're going straight up fast. And we've got different breathing patterns throughout as well to challenge swimmers in different ways so that they can learn how to execute these skills really well at high speeds, which is the ultimate challenge, is executing a breath while swimming at maximal speed and not having it negatively impact the stroke. Breaststroke is a difficult stroke to help swimmers go fast in. Everything has to be happening at the right time and in the right way, or the whole stroke falls apart. One of those key elements is breathing. If swimmers aren't breathing in the right way, at the right time, at the right speed, it's going to be really difficult for them to go fast. And unfortunately, just telling them to breathe faster or lower doesn't actually work very well. So in this video, I'm going to show you strategies that you can use to help your swimmers improve their breaststroke breathing. From why it matters, to what swimmers have to do, to what it looks like, to what you can do to help your swimmers improve their breaststroke, as well as a couple sets that show you these ideas in action. With that, let's dive in. So why does breathing matter in breaststroke? We've got 3 big reasons. First of all is resistance. So the breath is going to move swimmers out of alignment. When they go up with the upper body, the lower body can tend to sink, and that's going to mean more resistance. And the more they move out of alignment, the more resistance is going to create it. And that's just like putting on the brakes. And so if swimmers are coming up really high and their hips are dropping really low, that means they're going to create a ton of resistance, and that means they're going to lose a lot of speed. The second is tempo. So faster stroke rates can allow swimmers to go faster, and if their breath is taking more time than it should because they're moving more than they should, or they're getting stuck in a certain position, that means their stroke rate is going to be lower. So the more time they take, the slower the stroke rate. And when swimmers are trying to go fast, that can create a lot of problems because it becomes really difficult to swim at higher stroke rates when the breath is holding them up. And what some swimmers will do is they know they instinctively have to keep the stroke rate up, so they shortchange other important aspects of the stroke cycle to make up for the excessive length of the breath. So not only are they sometimes slowing their stroke rate down, they're actually compromising more effective and more important aspects of the stroke cycle in order to try to keep the stroke rate up. Lastly, it can affect timing. And so breaststroke is all about timing and rhythm. But if there's one part of the stroke that's taking more time than it should, or putting swimmers in positions where they're unable to swim with great timing or rhythm, that's going to really mess things up. And when their timing is off, their rhythm is off, they're going to swim slower, and it's going to be a lot more difficult, and that means they're going to get tired faster, which means they swim even slower. So for all these reasons, improving the breath is really critical in breaststroke, and for some, it can be the key to unlocking more speed. So what is effective breaststroke breathing? There's 2 aspects of it. One is the breath itself, so coming up out of alignment, and that's what we're going to talk about here. And the second one, which we'll talk about next, is coming back down after the breath, getting back into alignment. So the goal with the breath itself is to breathe without disrupting the alignment of the hips. So if swimmers are moving through the water, if they can breathe in a way that gets the upper body up without letting the hips drop, that's going to be effective. So if they can breathe like that, that's good. If they're breathing like that, that's not so good. So they have to try to find a way to get a breath without disrupting alignment of the hips. And one way to do that is to really focus on breathing with the body. So during the pull, the upper body is necessarily going to come up. And so swimmers want to time that breath. So the head's going to be in position to get a great breath as the body rises. If they try to do that earlier or later, it's going to be a lot more difficult to get the breath and to get an effective breath without disrupting the alignment of the hips. A second key skill is focusing on breathing forward. And doing so makes it a lot easier to maintain alignment while getting that breath. So if swimmers think about coming up, that's more likely to drop the hips down. If they think about coming forwards, they're a lot more likely to keep everything in line, maintain their alignment, and get a breath that moves them down the pool. The last piece is trying to optimize breath height. And so they're trying to maximize the pull while minimizing the hip drop. And so if the hips are dropping a ton, they're probably going to want to breathe less. So if their hips are dropping, they probably want to breathe lower. On the other hand, staying really low can compromise the effectiveness of the pull because rising up allows swimmers to create a lot of propulsion with the upper body. It allows them to get more leverage on the water. And so if they're swimming super flat, it's going to be tough to do that. So they want to come up enough that they can get more out of the pull, but not too much so that the hips drop. And so that's the challenge here, is finding the sweet spot. Now, after swimmers breathe, they got to get back into position. So how they do that has a big influence on the effectiveness of the breath and how fast they're ultimately going to be able to swim. So the goal is to get out of negative positions, positions that are causing them to slow down, as fast as possible. So what is that like? So when their head's up, there's more pressure on the hips to go down, and they're kind of bulldozing through the water. So they need to get out of that position as fast as they can, and they want to get back into a horizontal position. So the way to think about doing that is kind of like a seesaw. So when they're level in the water, when the head comes up, the hips tend to go down. And so they want to press on the fingertip side of the seesaw to get everything back in line. So if they think about driving everything forward and down, that's more likely to work that seesaw, press down the front end, and get the back end back up into alignment. So the breath shouldn't just be a lowering of the head. It should be an aggressive recovery, both forwards and down, so that they can get everything back in line. So swimmers can also pair the recovery of the breath with the recovery of the arms. The more violent that is, the more aggressive that is, the easier it's going to be to get the hips back up in line. If everything comes down nice and patiently, you're probably not going to get as much pressure. If things come back fast and really pop the hips up to the surface, they're going to be able to get back in line more effectively, and they're going to be able to get back in line faster. So the more aggressive they can be with the head recovery, the almost violent they can be with the head recovery and the arm recovery, the faster they're going to be able to pop everything back into place. And that becomes extremely important when trying to swim fast over short distances where swimmers do have to get back into alignment, but they have to do so without sacrificing the stroke rate. So let's check out what that looks like. So we'll take a look at it underwater so you can see an impact of the breath and the recovery on the position of the hips. So this swimmer, if you watch his hips here, they don't drop when he takes that breath. They just move forward in the water, which is what we're looking for. The other aspect you can see is he's breathing as the upper body rises. Then after he takes that breath, you're going to see the hands move forward fast. So right there, you can see how aggressive they were in those two frames. And then he's going to drive the head and the chest back down. And let's watch what the hips do. They get back up into alignment, and they're right where they need to be. If we go back, you can see that the hips haven't dropped much, but they do drop a little bit. And then after that recovery, they pop right back up to the surface, and everything is back into alignment after that breath. And what's important is this was a 100-meter race in a major championships, and I believe it was a world record, and he's still getting back into alignment after that breath after each stroke. So even at really high stroke rates, it's critical to get back after the breath into alignment after every stroke. So we'll watch again here. So as the body starts to rise, that's where the breath comes. He does it without dropping the hips hardly at all. And then a really fast and aggressive recovery of the hands and the head. And he's back in line, and the hips pop up back to the surface. So he's breathing in a way that allows him to keep his hips up at the surface and get a great pull. And And then after the breath, he's recovering fast and aggressively to get back into alignment as soon as he can without sacrificing the stroke rate. So we'll watch another swimmer here, same thing. So again, the head comes up as the body is rising. She takes her pull. Watch the hips there. They haven't really dropped much at all. And then aggressive recovery with the head and the hands. You can see how fast the hands move forwards right there. And you can see how fast right there she gets that head back down into the water. She's slamming it down. She's not being patient with it. She's getting really aggressive. And as a result, right there, the hips pop back up just a touch. If they've lost any height, they get back into position. So right there, and she's ready to go. And again, this is a major championship race, I believe over 100 meters. If it wasn't a world record, it was awfully close. And she's still getting back into alignment each stroke. So the way she's making that happen, like right here, she's breathing in a way that doesn't result in much loss of alignment. And then after the breath, she's getting back into a position by aggressively recovering and doing a great job of getting back into alignment as fast as she can by using the arms and the head to throw everything back into the water to get the hips back up to the surface. So if we watch the swimmers here, we can see the aggressiveness of the recovery, how they move everything forward fast, they move the head forward fast, and they really try to get back into alignment as quickly as they can. And when they breathe, you can see that the breath itself is even forwards. They're not just coming up, they're coming forwards with the breath, and they're recovering forwards, and they're getting everything back down in alignment really quickly. And you can see that even the hips pop up a little bit after that recovery on the left. And then on the right there, this is a 50-meter world championship race, and they're being really aggressive with getting back into alignment so that they can maintain their high stroke rate without sacrificing the alignment that they have and the amount of resistance they have as they move through the water. So they have to be really aggressive with breathing forward and then recovering that breath really fast and really aggressively to get everything back in line to maintain their speed. So we've talked about why the breath matters, and we've talked about what swimmers need to do in order to execute an effective breath. So what's the challenge? What makes it difficult to help swimmers learn to breathe effectively? First of all, it's going to be different for every swimmer. Their lower body is going to be shaped differently. It's going to have different lengths. It's going to have different weights. And their upper body is going to have different lengths. It's going to have different weights. It's going to have a different shape. So we talked about that teeter-totter earlier. It's going to work a little bit differently depending on the structure of the swimmer. Some swimmers may have to come up higher. Some swimmers may have to come up lower. And some swimmers may have to compensate more for coming up higher or lower. Everything's going to be a little bit different for each swimmer, even if they're trying to follow and achieve the same principles. So while it would be nice to have one breathing solution that applies to everyone, even though we have basic principles, we don't have a specific way that each breaststroker should swim. And if you're not convinced of that, just watch a major championship final in breaststroke, and you're going to see 8 totally different breaststrokes, and they're all going to be really effective at a world-class level. Another challenge with improving breathing, especially in breaststroke, is that everything affects everything in the stroke. Learning effective breathing can be tough with the rest of the stroke, because if one thing's off, like we talked about earlier, the whole stroke doesn't necessarily work, or it can just feel really terrible. So if swimmers are trying to figure out different ways of breathing, they may not be paying attention to the other important aspects of the stroke, and the whole thing can kind of fall apart, and it's difficult to learn in that context. So that's a challenge that's particularly specific to breaststroke, because in order to work on the stroke as a whole, everything has to be working well, and it's hard to make everything work well when you're focused on one particular aspect. Another challenge with breaststroke breathing is the precision involved. Swimmers have to find just the right height, they have to do it at just the right time, and they got to recover in just the right way. And as we mentioned, that precision is going to be a little bit different for each swimmer, and if it's off just a little bit, it can really affect the stroke. And I'm sure you've seen when breaststrokers kind of lose their stroke and they can't get it back, and the performance impact is obvious, well, breathing can play a big role in that as well. Last challenge is for all these reasons, you can't necessarily teach it. Because of the different shapes and sizes of swimmers, you don't know exactly how they should breathe, and you don't know exactly how they should return the breath. And because of the precision involved, it's tough to be able to see those slight differences and see those slight changes and see the impact of them. It's going to be difficult to tell a swimmer to breathe 1 inch lower or to angle their body at 5 degrees less or more. That's not going to be something that swimmers can really understand. And further, it's not something that you're probably even going to be able to see. And I'll speak for myself, I can't see that type of stuff. So to overcome these challenges, we need solutions that make them irrelevant. And that's what we're going to talk about next. So to help swimmers improve their breaststroke breathing, we need to find solutions that allow them to find the optimal breath for them. They need to figure out the right time to breathe, and they need to figure out the right way to breathe. And because we can't necessarily know exactly what's going to be perfect for them, the way to address that problem is to do everything we can to put them in situations where they can start to feel and figure out what's going to be the best breath for them. So we're going to go over 2 exercise strategies that can help them do so. We're going to go over 2 training aid solutions that can be really helpful. And then we're going to go over some performance solutions to help put pressure on them to figure out the best ways for them to move through the water. So the most important solution, and my favorite one, is varying the breath. So because we can't know what perfect breathing is going to be for any swimmer, rather than trying to do it perfectly, we're going to try to do it in every way possible so that they get exposed to tons of different breathing patterns. Then they can learn all the different options, they can feel the impact of those different options, then they can select the best option, which allows them to move through the water with the least effort and the most speed. And importantly, it's not necessarily a conscious process. They're just going to naturally gravitate towards whatever is going to be the most effective. And part of that process is driven by performance goals, which is what we're going to talk about later. Again, they're not really thinking through, this is exactly how I should breathe. But by providing them with lots of input, lots of different information, they start to figure out what's going to be the most effective way to breathe that allows them to move through the water as fast as possible. So we have a few different ways that they can breathe. 1, they can not breathe, they keep their head down throughout the whole stroke cycle. 2, they can breathe normally. 3, they can breathe with their head up, so they're just swimming and they're not letting their head drop at all. They can also think about looking down when they breathe, and they can think about looking forward when they breathe. Those are the different ways that they can execute a breath. And then by varying those options and then combining those options in different ways, we have an unlimited number of variations and alternations that we can use. So for instance, they can alternate between head down and regular breathing or head down and head up breathing. They can switch that every stroke cycle. They can switch that lap by lap. They can use all sorts of different variations, and you're only limited by your creativity. The goal here is to help them explore all the different breathing patterns so they can start to figure out what's going to help them go fast. You can also change the kick, so you can use flutter kick, dolphin kick, or breaststroke kick. That will allow them to get a different feel for the breath. And like we talked about earlier, the timing issue can be a real challenge. So by using flutter and dolphin kick, we can kind of eliminate that timing challenge so they can just focus on the breath, they can just focus on moving forward, and they don't have to figure out how to make sure the kick is working with all of that. And again, like I mentioned a couple minutes ago, the key aspect too is to make sure that they're asked to perform. So they're trying to go faster with head up breaststroke, for instance, or they're trying to go faster with head down breaststroke, for instance, or they're trying to go faster alternating between head down and head up. And they're going to try to find the best ways to do that and perform while using those different variations. And the more they learn to perform with these different breathing patterns, the more effective they're going to be with all breathing patterns. Just to show you what it looks like, here's breaststroke without breathing. So they're just focused on keeping the head as low as they can. Obviously it's going to rise up a little bit, and that's fine, but they're trying to minimize the amount of up and down motion, the amount that the head is coming up out of the water. Now, more or less the opposite of that is head up breaststroke. So they're swimming with their head up, and that's going to help them be more aware of what's happening with their hips, because as you can see here, his hips are going to ride pretty low no matter what he tries to do, and that can help him feel the impact of having the head up while he swims. This particular version can be really useful for helping swimmers learn to recover the hands quickly, because there tends to be an abbreviated pull, and they can literally see how fast they're moving their arms over the surface of the water. Last variation we'll take a look at is alternating between keeping the head down and breathing normally. The goal here is to feel the difference between the two breathing patterns, and by doing it every other stroke and then asking them to perform it that way, they're going to try to figure out exactly what they need to do to keep everything moving forward regardless of the breathing pattern. Next option is to resist the recoveries, specifically the arm recoveries. So poor arm recoveries slow the breath recovery. If the swimmers are getting stuck here, they can't get back with the heads because the hands are still in the way. So one way to draw attention to that is to resist the recoveries. So you can put drag socks on the elbow, you can put drag socks on the wrist, you can have it hanging over the elbow or hanging over the wrist, or you can bunch it up and just have it be like almost a wristband and then a elbow band there too. And what you're going to do is it requires them to recover with intent. They've got that extra resistance, and if they're not being really aggressive, they're just going to totally get stuck. And so to even make their stroke work at all, they have to be really aggressive with getting the arms recovered and getting the arms recovered fast. For swimmers that tend to put not much effort in the recovery, or they just don't really understand how important it is, this can help get their attention and force them to be more aggressive with the arm recoveries. So improving the arm recoveries is a really important aspect of the breath recovery, because the arms need to get out of the way so that the head and the body can come back down. Now, not everyone has drag socks, and so for plan B, what you can do is go head up breaststroke with dolphin kick or a flutter kick, and then have them go fast. So because the head's gonna be up, they're gonna have to really be super aggressive, and you can have them watch the arms and be really aggressive with those recoveries, and by having them do it with dolphin kick and flutter kick, it tends to speed up the stroke rate, and you can add fins if you wanted to, and that's gonna really encourage them and force them to recover fast. Of course, you can do head up breaststroke with dolphin kick and flutter kick and use the drag socks to resist the recoveries, which can make it even more effective. The main idea is challenge them to recover the arms fast so that they can get back into alignment faster with the arms, which means they can get back into alignment faster with the head. And the faster everything moves forward, as we talked about, that's going to get that seesaw rolling, and that's going to get everything back into alignment fast. The faster that happens, the sooner they can take the next stroke without disrupting alignment, and the faster their stroke rate's going to be, the faster they're going to go. From more of a general strategy perspective, you can add resistance. So resistance is going to slow them down, and they're going to have to work harder to get back into alignment. Generally speaking, it's going to pull the hips down, and it's going to make it harder to get back into alignment and get the hips back up. So swimmers are going to have to work really hard, similar to what we did with the resisted arm recoveries. They're going to have to work really hard to get back into position with each stroke. And when we're using different breathing patterns, that's going to challenge them further. So they're going to have to figure out how to make that happen with the resistance and with different breathing patterns. So similarly, the resistance tends to pull the hips out of position, so they're going to have to work harder to stay in line. They're going to have to work harder to get back in line. So it takes the basic challenge present with using different breathing patterns, and then it magnifies it because of the added resistance. And so you can use a weight belt, which is definitely going to pull the hips down. You can use a parachute, which really tends to pull the hips down. And then you can use the cord and the pulleys, which, because the resistance tends to be on the pool deck, is not going to pull their hips down quite as much, but it is going to make it more difficult for them to manage their position, and it's going to do so in a slightly different way, which, as we talked about, variation can be really useful for that purpose. So varying the breathing and then also challenging the recoveries can be made even more effective by adding different types of resistance, making it more difficult to both stay in line and get back in line after every breath. And that extra challenge can help them learn how to be more effective with each breath. Another strategy you can use to challenge the same activities is training aids. And so two in particular that I think are really useful. One is hold tennis balls. And the reason you want to do that, you use a tennis ball, close their fist, you can't use the hand, and now they have to use the forearm. But more importantly, the hands are really used to kind of lift the body to breathe effectively. But if they don't have the hands, they're going to have to figure out how to use the torso, how to manipulate and control the torso without relying only on the hands to get the body into position. So they're going to have to really use their torso to get where they want to be and how they want to breathe. So that's an extra challenge regardless of the breathing pattern they're going to use. They're going to have to figure out how to breathe effectively without using the hands to move themselves in position. Then, of course, once they get the hands back, it's going to be even easier to do so. Second, you can have them use fins. And so when they're using fins, everything happens faster. They need to be more precise with the breathing. They need to be more aggressive with the breathing, because if they don't, they're going to miss that timing window because everything needs to happen faster. Secondly, because they're moving faster through the water, the consequences of poor breathing are going to be more obvious. If they're coming up high and they're getting stuck in that position, they're really going to feel it. And if they don't do a good job of coming back out of that breath, they're also going to feel it because they're going to feel all that resistance they're creating when they're not in alignment in the front of the stroke. So fins can be really useful for practicing these skills at faster speeds, where swimmers have to execute faster, and the consequences of not executing are going to be more obvious. All the solutions we've discussed so far become even more effective when we ask for performance. And so you always want to ask for performance regardless of what you're doing. And it could be stroke counts, it can be stroke rates, it can be speed, or some combination. And they don't have to necessarily ask for maximal effort or maximal output. You just want to have them have a goal of some sort to challenge them to perform at higher levels. And so there's two basic ways you can do that. You can have them use the sensory activities, the solutions we've talked about, and then perform. So for instance, they go 425s head up breaststroke plus flutter kick to help them feel that different breathing pattern. And then they go right into 425s breaststroke, minimized stroke count and time, where they're trying to perform. Or you could have them perform during those sensory activities as well. So 425s breaststroke, they're going to alternate head up and then no air by stroke. So they go one stroke head up, one stroke head down. And on those, they're going to minimize stroke count and time as well. Then they go right into 425s, minimize stroke count and time. So in the first case, we're helping them feel something different, and then they perform. In the second case, we're having them perform while they use a different strategy and then perform while swimming regular breaststroke. By using the different performance strategies, we're not just suggesting that they pay attention or suggesting that they try to find new solutions, we're requiring them to. If they're trying to go faster, if they're trying to hit different stroke counts, if they're trying to hit different stroke rates, They're necessarily going to swim differently, and we want to use that to encourage them to explore how they're breathing and also find the ways that are most effective at producing performance. Regardless of what they're doing, they're going to get more out of it when there's performance expectations. All right, so what does this actually look like when it comes down to sets? This is more of a skill set. We're going to go 2 rounds through it. They're going to go 325s, 325s, and 225s, and then 325s, 325s, and 225s. They're going to go through that 2 total rounds. You can certainly do this with or without resistance or with different types of resistance. So they're going to go 325s breaststroke with a parachute. They're taking as few strokes as possible. No air, breathe every other stroke, and number 3 is regular. And then they're going to go 325s breaststroke with a parachute, build a strong, no air, breathe every other stroke, and regular. And then they're going to go 225s breaststroke. Number 1 is breathe every other stroke. Number 2 is regular. The second half is going to be the same as the first half. The only difference is the first half is focused more on the low aspect of the breath, so they're not breathing often. And then on the second half, we're focusing on having a really high breath with the head up position. So number 1 is head up, number 2 is head up every other stroke, number 3 is regular, and then the last 2 are head up every other stroke, and the last one is regular. So we've got stroke count expectations here, we've got speed expectations here, we're using resistance, and we're varying the breathing pattern in lots of different ways to help them explore how to go fast, how to figure it out, how to stay long, regardless of the breathing pattern. And the resistance, the parachute, adds an extra challenge and will give them more feedback about what they're doing and how they're swimming. So it's a great way to challenge swimmers to figure out how to breathe effectively by showing them and asking them to breathe in different ways, and then I'm asking them to perform regardless of the breathing pattern or how they're swimming. Next set has a little bit more of an endurance focus. They're going to go 4 rounds through. They're going to go a 75 with flutter kick, and then a 75 with dolphin kick, and then a 50 breaststroke to finish. So the 75s are always going to be 25 alternate head up and regular, 25 breathe every other stroke, so head down and regular, and then 25 breaststroke. And then the 50 is always the same stroke count each 50, and they're going to descend the whole thing 1 to 4 by round. So they're having to perform with different kicks, they're having to perform with different breathing patterns, and then they're going to put it all together with regular breaststroke. So the idea here is to figure out how to swim faster and faster, regardless of the breathing pattern and regardless of the kicking pattern. The more effective they can be in any of these variations, the more effective they're going to be in all these variations. The better they can get at swimming fast, regardless of the breathing pattern, the more likely it is they're going to be able to execute with the right breathing pattern when it really matters. And we're helping them build the endurance to execute well, regardless of the breathing pattern. Last set is more of a speed set. They're going to go 3 rounds through. They're going to go 8 times 6 cycles fast breaststroke with a 100 stroke rate. So whatever their stroke rate is for 100, that's what they're going to use. They're going to go odds, dolphin kick, evens, or breaststroke kick. They're going to alternate with 2 with drag socks on the elbow and then 2 with drag socks on the wrist. And so the challenge there is they have to hit 100 stroke rate even though they have that extra resistance. So they're going to have to be really aggressive with the recoveries of both the arms and the breath. They're going to have to work to get back into alignment fast. Next, they're going to go 25 head up breaststroke with flutter kick, and that's fast. So they're going to have to be really aggressive with the arm recoveries. Then they're going into 25 breaststroke fast where they try to put everything together. So this aspect, we're really working on getting back into alignment fast, working on the recovery of the breath as opposed to the breath itself. And they have to be really good with recovering the arms fast, getting the head back down in alignment fast so that they can swim fast. So breaststroke breathing is a really critical skill. Unfortunately, it's not one where we can just tell swimmers exactly what to do. So we have to put them in situations. Where they can figure out the most effective breathing pattern for them. That's going to come from using different variations of breathing, using different variations of kicking, and then really challenging that with resistance, with fins, with tennis balls, and then asking them to perform. By using those solutions, you can help your swimmers breathe more effectively. Effective breathing is a critical skill in all the strokes, and that's certainly true for butterfly. If swimmers can't breathe effectively, they're going to make an already difficult stroke that much more challenging. Let's take a look at the key skills in great butterfly breathing, as well as how to improve them. We're going to go over why it matters, what swimmers need to do, the challenges of executing effective breathing, and then how to overcome those challenges. Finally, we'll wrap it up with some sets that you can implement with your swimmers today or use for inspiration to design your own sets. Let's get started. So why does breathing matter in butterfly? Well, the reality is that swimmers have to breathe. In every event over a 50, they're going to have to breathe, and if they're not breathing well, there's going to be problems. What are those problems? Well, swimmers are going to have to come up higher in order to breathe because they have to make sure that their mouth clears the water so they can actually get air in. The more the shoulders and the hips come up, the lower the hips are going to go. And the lower the hips are going to go, the more resistance swimmers are going to create as they move through the water. The more resistance that they create, the slower they go, and the harder it is. And if you've swum butterfly, if If you've watched swimmers swim butterfly, you know that as soon as butterfly gets hard, things get real ugly real fast. And everything we can do to avoid that situation is something we want to take advantage of. So with poor breathing comes less speed, less endurance, slower times. And so swimmers have to find a way to breathe that minimizes how high they come up to breathe and also helps them get back into position as quickly as possible. The better they can do that, the less resistance they'll create as a result of the breath, and the faster they're going to swim, and it's going to be a much more enjoyable experience, and they're going to be able to hold that speed for a whole lot longer. So what is great butterfly breathing? Well, it's as high as necessary and as low as possible. So swimmers have to be able to get air consistently, but they want to do so while minimizing the disruption of alignment as much as possible. So they need to get high enough that they can get air, and they want to stay low enough that they can stay level as they go. So one of the great ways to think about that is keeping the chin low as they breathe, as low to the surface as possible, and then getting the head back down fast so they can get out of those negative positions as quickly as possible. And so thinking about as high as necessary, as low as possible is a great way to conceptualize it for swimmers. Another great way to think about it is trying to minimize the difference between the breathing stroke and the non-breathing stroke. The non-breathing stroke is going to be pretty level. Can they maintain that same level position in the water even when they add the breath? That's the goal. They want to be as close as they can, and the more effectively they can do that, the closer they can get, the better the breath. In terms of timing, a great way to think about it is to breathe with the pull, and then they want to race the recovery back, trying to get back in line before the arms come around. Again, as high as necessary so they can get their air, as low as possible to minimize any disruption of alignment. And the smaller the difference between the breathing stroke and the non-breathing stroke, the better. And in terms of timing, start the breath as they pull and then get the head back down before the arms enter the water. If they can execute those relatively simple skills, they're going to be set. So if we watch breathing here, what we'll see is that she's keeping the head really low. She's staying really low to the water, and that's allowing her to get that breath. It's as high as necessary. She's getting air, but it's also low as possible. You can see that chin is right on the surface of the water, and she's being really effective at staying low throughout the breath, and that's going to maintain her alignment as much as possible while still allowing her to get air so she can accomplish both objectives, which is lots of air, as little resistance as possible. If she can do that, she's on track. So we've got another swimmer here, and what you can see here is he's going to alternate a non-breathing stroke and a breathing stroke. And what you're looking for is you can see the head's going to come up a little bit, and on the non-breathing, it's going to come up a little bit more on the breathing stroke. And he's doing a really good job of minimizing the difference between the two. You can tell when he breathes, but it's not super obvious, and that's going to allow him to maintain as level a position in the water while still getting the air he needs. And that's ultimately going to help him accomplish the objective of getting oxygen while minimizing how much resistance he creates when he breathes. So low and fast is what we're really looking for. Another aspect to pay attention to is watch how she gets the head down before those hands come around. So right there, the head's going back down and her head is down by the time the arms enter the water. So that's a key aspect of recovering the breath. Not only do we want to make sure it's low, but we want to make sure that swimmers get out of that negative position as quickly as possible and get back into a line with each stroke. We'll take a look at it under the water so that we can get a better sense of the timing. So if we watch here, she's going to start that breath as she starts to pull. So right here, the head's down, she starts to pull. Right there, you can see that that breath starts to come up, the head starts to come out, and then from a timing standpoint, bam, her head's back in the water before those arms get back in the water. So breathing with the pull, and then the head is back down ahead of the recovery. So effective breathing is ultimately simple. Breathe with the pull, get the head back down before the end of the recovery, and keep the breath as low as possible. So why is it so difficult? First of all, swimmers are worried about choking, and rightfully so. They probably had one or two experiences that they got a little bit too much water when they took a breath, and that's not something that they want to repeat. And so from their thought process, conscious or not, it's better to be safe than sorry. They're going to breathe a little bit higher than they probably absolutely need to. They don't want to take any chances. The other aspect is that too much butterfly with weak swimmers kind of creates survival breathing. So they're just trying to get to the other side of the pool, and in order to do that, they need to get air, and they're going to make sure that they get air. So they're going to use strategies that definitely guaranteed get them air, even if it's not necessarily the fastest way. And so if swimmers are swimming a lot of tired butterfly, or they're just not strong enough to swim it well in the first place, they're going to start developing bad timing and bad habits, which is something we want to avoid. And if swimmers are coming to you already established those habits, well, we've got our work cut out for us in terms of changing those habits. Lastly, small differences can have a major impact. Just a small change in the angle of the breath can have a big impact on the angle of the hips, which has a big impact on how much resistance that swimmers create as they move through the water. The problem is they can't necessarily feel those tiny changes. If they've performed thousands or 10,000s of breaths, they can't feel subtlety anymore. They're not going to be aware of the consequences of what they're doing because they've done it so many times. It just feels the same, and if they can't feel a difference, they're not going to be able to execute on a difference. So a lot of swimmers have fear about breathing too low. They simply have bad habits due to past experiences, and they can no longer feel the impact of their breath. So we have to overcome these challenges if we want to help swimmers improve their breathing. As with most skills in swimming, breathing in butterfly is ultimately pretty simple. Unfortunately, simple isn't easy. So we have to find ways to help swimmers learn how to breathe low, how to breathe fast, how to time their breath with the pull and get the head back down prior to the recovery if we want them to improve their breathing. We're going to have to help them feel these key skills, because if they can feel these key skills, then they're more likely to be able to change them. 1, they need to understand what needs to happen. 2, they have to be able to feel what needs to happen. And then 3, they need to be able to execute on what needs to happen. So let's check out our options for helping swimmers improve their breathing. First things first, swimmers need to make sure that they have effective overall arm-to-leg timing in butterfly. If they don't, they're going to really struggle to breathe effectively because the whole rhythm, the whole timing of the stroke is going to be off. So if the timing's messed up, the breathing's going to be a challenge. And when their timing's off, they're just going to find a way to breathe whenever it suits them. They don't care if it kills their speed. They can't tell if it kills their speed. They just need to find a way to breathe, and they're going to fit it in whenever they can. If the arms and the legs aren't doing the right thing at the right time, there's not going to be an effective time to breathe, so they're just going to pick one. So poor timing means poor strategy in terms of breathing. So if swimmers are struggling with their timing, you need to work on that first. And since timing is a video in and of itself, I've already made one. And if you click on the tab that pops up over there, you should be able to check that out. Now, their timing doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be good enough so that it's not obstructing the breath. So if they have timing issues, work on that, try to get that better, and then go about trying to fix the breath. So assuming they've got decent overall butterfly timing, skate drill is the first place to start in terms of improving the breath. So it's a simple strategy that just allows swimmers to feel what it's like to stay low and how to stay low. And so it's a great starting point for helping them conceive and understand how low they can breathe and how effective it is to breathe that low. So what they're going to do is they're just going to get that feel during skate drill, and then they're going to try to translate into their swimming using some of the strategies we're going to discuss later on. So the idea is to skate the chin on the surface of the water, hence the name, and that helps swimmers understand how to breathe forwards rather than up. If they breathe up, they're going to lose contact with the water, and if they breathe forward, they're going to be able to stay on the surface of the water, and they're going to be able to breathe really low. They also have to breathe when they pull, because if they don't, it's not going to really work at all. So as soon as they initiate the pull, they initiate the breath, and so swimmers can work on the timing of it as well, learning how to stay low and execute the breath in the timing with a pull. So here's the idea. Again, trying to breathe really low with the chin on the surface of the water and trying to hold that position. You don't need to dive down in the front of the stroke. You're trying to hold the surface and hold the chin on the surface so that they can really feel how they're skating forwards rather than coming up. And again, if you watch here, he takes the pull and then breathes as he pulls, and that's really what we're looking for here. So as the arms start to pull, that's when the breath goes, and then skating the chin on the surface, which helps them understand how to breathe low, and the feedback of the water lets them know if they're executing it correctly. Next strategy is either swimming with a snorkel or swimming without breathing. And so a lot of times the best way to help swimmers understand a skill is to take it away. And that's certainly true of breathing as well. So if you take away the breath, it becomes more obvious of the impact of the breath when swimmers add it back in when they go back to regular butterfly. And we talked about earlier, a lot of swimmers can't really tell or feel how the breath is impacting their stroke. But by taking the breath away and then adding it back in and then going back and forth between the two, they can start to tell the difference between when they're not breathing and when they're breathing, and they can take that gap and try to shrink it. And the more they can shrink it, the less resistance they're going to be creating as they breathe. And it's that awareness that we create by having them use a snorkel, by swimming without breathing, that allows them to make that progress. So the goal is to have great alignment without the breath, which should be relatively easy to do. And then they have to add the breath back in, and they want to maintain the same great alignment. If there's a difference, they want to shrink the difference. The more they can shrink the difference, the better the skill is. So let's say if a non-breathing stroke is a 10 and they start out with a breathing stroke that's rated at a 5, if they can get it to a 6, they've improved. If they can get it to a 7, they've improved even more, and so on. They may not make it to 10, but the closer they can get, the better. Now, in terms of using a snorkel or just having them not breathe, well, the snorkel allows them to do more work with less stress. If you're doing no air butterfly, you're going to have to give them more rest. You're not going to be able to do anything more than 25 with any sort of volume. Whereas with a snorkel, you can do a lot more work and you can do it with less stress. One, the value is that they get more work in, so they get more practice in. But two, it's just not as stressful either, which is beneficial as well. So a great strategy for helping swimmers learn to feel the difference when they breathe and when they don't, and allow them to contrast and go back and forth between the two to create even more awareness. So here we've got butterfly with a snorkel, and as you can see, his head's going to rise up a little bit based upon the rhythm of his undulation. However, he's not coming up to breathe. And if he didn't have the snorkel on there, he's not getting any air. And so creating that position, allowing him to feel that position as he moves through the water, and then once we add the breath back in, he can try to maintain that same low position, that same low rhythm as much as possible. And the more times he can go back and forth between those two skills, the more effective he's going to be at learning how to breathe with maintaining great alignment and keeping a breath that's lower and less resistive. The next strategy is using different breathing patterns. So whether it's no breath, breathe every 3, breathe every 2, breathe every 1, and mixing those all up, it builds upon the previous strategy where there's a contrast between not breathing and breathing. Now we're going to have that contrast happening all the time within the same lap. And the more swimmers can manage different rhythms, different timings, and different breath patterns, the better they're going to be able to execute a great breath regardless of the situation. So breathing every 3 is going to feel a little bit different than breathing every 2, which is going to feel different than breathing every 1. But in every case, the goal is to have swimmers execute a really, really great breath. Regardless of how they're going to race, you want them practicing all of the different breathing patterns so that they can master all of them so that they can improve the overall skill in breathing. So they want to have great breathing regardless of their rhythm. And so once they can execute a single good breath, it's time to start challenging that with different breathing patterns. They can master a lot of different versions of the same basic skill. They're going to have better overall mastery of that skill. The more swimmers can learn how to create speed, create efficiency, create endurance with different breathing patterns and switch back and forth between the different breathing patterns, the more effective they're going to be at breathing in butterfly. A lot of swimmers tend to come up really high, again, because they're trying to make sure that they get air. And what they do with that is they use their hands and their arms to lift themselves up. Now, if we're sneaky and have them close their fist and take away the hands, well, now it's going to be a whole lot harder for them to elevate to take that breath. And then they can start to feel the impact of it. It'll prevent them from coming up too high and disrupting alignment. Because they can't do that, they can feel what it's like to actually stay relatively level and stay relatively smooth when they take that breath. Then, having felt that, you can add the hands back in, make sure that they still get an effective pull, but tell them they have to have that same feeling, that same sensation when they breathe. It's forward rather than up. By using the different hand postures, swimmers can start to become aware of whether they are and to the extent that they're lifting in the water. And with every skill, if you can feel it, you can change it. So we just have to find a way to help them feel it. You can use lots of different hand positions. Anything that makes the hand smaller, makes the hand less effective is going to be useful. And you can use it when swimming regular butterfly. You can do it with skate drill. You can do it with any drill. And it's going to help them learn to stay low and learn how to create force backwards so that they move forwards rather than down so that they go up too much. One, it'll probably help their pull. But two, it's going to help them stay more level and breathe lower as they move through the water. Next up is using different training aids. So again, we talked about how awareness is key for feeling the impact of the breath. And once they can feel it, they can change it. Using different training aids can help them feel how much resistance they're creating as they move through the water. So overspeed. The faster they go, the more drag they create. The more drag they create, the more they can feel the drag. So having them go really, really fast and then practice breathing and not breathing, it's going to be more obvious how badly the poor breath will slow them down. They're going to feel all that pressure, all that resistance. And by going really fast, particularly with fins, it becomes a lot more obvious. The more obvious it is, the more they can feel it, the more they can change it. The same idea happens with clothing. You have them wear a t-shirt, you have them wear shorts. They're going to feel a lot more resistance as they take that breath. And then when they take the clothing off, they're going to be more aware of how the water's flowing over their body. They can feel the difference between when they breathe and when they don't breathe. Again, feel the difference. You can start to change it. So that's what we're looking to accomplish, especially with the clothing. Weight belt. Whenever swimmers breathe, the hips are going to drop a little bit. If they've got a weight belt, the hips are going to drop a lot. So that can be really useful because, again, it creates more clarity about the impact of the breath. Whatever a loss of alignment they experience when they breathe, it's going to be a whole lot worse when they have that weight belt. So they're going to understand the consequences of their skills. When much more clarity, the more clear they are about what's happening, the easier it is for them to create change and the easier it is for them to fix those skills. So training aids can be really great regardless of what drills or activities you're doing because they help swimmers better feel the impact of the breath on their alignment and on the resistance they create as they move through the water. As with all skills, using different performance challenges can be really valuable for helping swimmers change. So have them go at different speeds, different stroke counts, different stroke rates, different combinations of the two. It forces them to explore different ways of moving through the water, and that's going to help them improve their skills and help them learn to execute skills in a lot of different situations. So you want to challenge skills in many different contexts. Novelty, variety, they build skill. Just doing something different can be really useful and really powerful. More importantly, with performance challenges, it's not about going as fast as possible or taking as few strokes as possible or the fastest rate that's possible. It just has to be something that they're trying to accomplish, and you're pushing them and having them swim in different ways. So it doesn't have to be maximal. It just has to be a moderate challenge. They have to swim differently, and the more that they can be forced to swim differently, whatever it is, the more effective. And so if you're having swimmers try to go a little bit faster, that's going to affect how well they can breathe and how they breathe and what they feel when they can breathe. Same thing with higher or lower stroke rates. Same thing with the higher or lower stroke counts. So it's just a way to challenge swimmers and get them to swim differently in lots of different ways, and that can help them improve their skills. This is a great set that it really focuses on the skill of butterfly breathing. So they're going to go 3 rounds through. 425 skate drill. They're just going to descend 1 to 4. It doesn't have to be a big descend. They're just trying to go a little bit faster. Focus here, breathe on the pull, skate the chin on the surface of the water. Then they're going to go 425s, butterfly, odds or no air, evens are breathing every 3. They're going to try to be as level as possible when they're not breathing. And then when they take the breaths on the breathe every 3, they're trying to skate on the surface just like they did in the drill. Then they're going to repeat that same basic pattern 2 more times, except the skate drill they're going to build, and then they're going to go strong on the 3rd section, and they're going to go breathe every 2, and then breathe every 1 on the next full stroke butterfly sections. So we're challenging them with different breathing patterns. We've got the drill, but they're creating speed in different ways, and we're having them alternate between not breathing and regular breathing, and that's going to really help challenge them and push them to figure out the difference between the two, and then try to take what they're learning during the skate drill and make that happen with the actual butterfly breathing. So we're doing our best to help them feel the key skills and then giving them the opportunity to practice those key skills. Next set, they're going to go 4 rounds. They're going to start off with dolphin kick on the surface with fins and a snorkel and a t-shirt, and that's strong effort. So the focus there is they're just being really great alignment as they move on the surface of the water. The fins add a little bit more speed. The t-shirt adds a little bit more resistance, and the snorkel allows them to not have to worry about breathing. Then they're going to go 50 butterfly with a snorkel, strong effort. They're going to try to stay as low, as level as they just did on that kick. And then we're going to add the breathing, going every other stroke on the next one. And then we're going to add the breathing every stroke on the last one. And each time they add the breath, each time they add more breaths, they're trying to stay as level, as streamlined, and as effective with the breathing as when they weren't breathing. The goal is to keep the speed the same, the effort the same, regardless of the breathing pattern. So when they add breaths, it shouldn't be slower, and they shouldn't have to try harder. They should be just as good with their alignment as they are when they're not breathing. The odd rounds, they'll do the whole thing with fins, and on the even rounds, the 350 swim are going to be without fins. The fins will allow them to create a little bit more speed, create a little bit more awareness of how they're breathing, and then they'll do it as they actually have to do it on the regular butterfly swims on the 2nd and 4th round. So creating a little bit more sensory awareness, and then helping them feel how to execute those skills with or without the breath, trying to stay as level as they can and stay as consistent as they can throughout the entire set. Last set, we're going to go fast, and we're going to use the skate drill to help them really lock in the skill, help them learn how to skate that chin on the surface and breathe with the pull. They're going to go 2 swims of 8 strokes fast. The first one's no air. The second one's breathe every stroke. So we've got the contrast between being really level in the water and then trying to be really level in the water even when they're breathing. By round, we're going to use different types of resistance to help them become more aware and to better feel how they're moving through the water and the impact of the breath so that they can learn to feel and then change how they're breathing. First 2, they're with a t-shirt. Second 2, they're with shorts. Last 2 are with weight belt. T-shirt's going to create more pressure on the upper body. The shorts are going to create more pressure on the legs. And then they're going to feel more resistance across the hips with the weight belt. In the last section, they have the chance to take off all the gear and just let it rip. And again, the goal is to make the difference between the breathing repetitions and the non-breathing repetitions as absolutely as small as possible. By using speed work here, we're helping them learn to execute these skills really fast. And by using the resistance, we're making it easier for them to feel how well they're breathing or how well they're not breathing, and then they have the chance to do something about that.